Good afternoon, and welcome to our TV show featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at mythsandrealities.com. In episode 50, we learned from Boghos Nubar Pasha's letters to the French government in 1918 and then to London Times in 1919 that the Armenians have been, since the beginning of the war, de facto belligerents, as they have fought alongside the Allies on all fronts. There was not a single word in any of the letters about the allegation of systematic extermination by the Ottomans. In Palestine and Syria, Nubar said, the Armenian volunteers played a large role in the victory of General Allenby. And in the Caucasus, 150,000 Armenians in the Imperial Russian Army and more than 50,000 of Ottoman-Armenian volunteers contributed to the Ottoman Empire's loss of a great portion of Eastern Anatolia. While Nubar was revealing these facts, he was striving for a place at the Paris Peace Conference table. Little did he know that they would also amount to a massive Armenian confession, that the Armenian suffering was not due to a systematic extermination campaign by the Ottoman government, but due to the treasonable acts of most Ottoman Armenians, as in revolts, terrorism, and joining the enemy armies, invading enemy armies. These two Nubar letters sum up why the Ottomans, who were fighting for their survival on many fronts, while also combating a widespread Armenian insurgency at home, had to remove out of war zones the Armenian rebels and their logistic base. In episodes 50 and 51 and 52, I have explored with you another major Armenian confession, that of the first Prime Minister of Armenia in the book Armenian Revolutionary Federation Has Nothing to Do Anymore, the Manifesto of Hovannes Katchznouni, translated by Matthew Callender, edited by John Roy Carlson, and published in 1955 by the Armenian Information Service in New York. In this book, Katchznouni related, and I quote, "At the beginning of the fall of 1914, when Turkey had not yet entered the war but had already been making preparations, Armenian revolutionary bands began to be formed in Transcaucasia with great enthusiasm and especially with much uproar. The winter of 1914 and the spring of 1915 were the periods of greatest enthusiasm and hope for all the Armenians in the Caucasus. We had no doubt that the war would end with the complete victory of the Allies, Turkey would be defeated and dismembered, and its Armenian population would at last be liberated." Unquote. Katchznouni described how the Armenians had created a dense atmosphere of illusion in their minds and lost their sense of reality. He confessed that the struggle that had begun decades ago against the Turkish government brought about the deportation of the Armenian people in Turkey, which is what I pointed out all along in this program. Katchznouni's 1923 conclusion was supported by Louis Nalbandian's 1963 book, The Armenian Revolutionary Movement, pages 67 through 89. The Zeytun Rebellion of 1862 was the beginning of massive uprisings directed against the Ottoman government. After establishing many secret societies like the Union of Salvation, the Black Cross Society, the Protectors of the Fatherland, the Armenican Party, the Hunchaks, the Dashnaks, and staging hundreds of bloody uprisings, assassinations, raids, bombings, and finally joining the invading enemy armies, Armenians sealed their own fate. Turks only reacted to defend their home. Then in episode 54, I analyzed the third massive confession, the one by the Armenian author Gabriel Papazian in his book Patriotism Perverted. This 79-page book, published in Boston in 1934, reveals the hate crimes of ARF, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, or Dashnak Sutun, and is dedicated to the Armenian victims of Dashnak terrorism. Papazian's book exposes the true nature of the Dashnaks as murderous ones who have caused much destruction to those whom the ARF has regarded as ARF's enemies, as well as the Armenian people themselves. Papazian maintains that by committing senseless violence against Muslims, the ARF deliberately exposed innocent Armenians to retaliatory massacres. Aggravated by the ARF's culture of profiteering and corruption, famine and disease claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Armenians in the Armenian Republic in 1914 to 1920 period. The power-hungry Dashnaks' greed, arrogance, and ineptness in starting seditious wars in quick succession has a lot to do with the huge losses of life and property, while the country had thousands of ills that needed attention. A hopeless revolt against the Soviets in 1922, which, according to Papazian, led to the deaths of tens of thousands of Armenian lives, page 51. Papazian condemned the ARF as an enemy of the nucleus of Armenian political life, as an organization that has degenerated to the gangsters of America. Quote, ARF's plottings and crimes have rocked the conscience of all decent Armenians and have disgraced Armenians before the civilized world. Unquote. Episode 55, we talked about another confession, and by the Armenian Revolutionary Federation itself, in their book called Houshamatyan of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation Centennial, Volume 1, published in Glendale in 2006. I scoured the internet to see if this book was available for purchase or reading online. No such luck. That is because this book is intended as a thank you gift to be given to the Armenian donors. In it, the ARF tells you how great fighters Armenians were, when and where they smuggled arms into the Ottoman Empire, how they attacked Turks and killed Turks, and who were in what Armenian gang, the whole thing. A far cry from the poor, starving Armenians cliché, isn't it? How did I get it? Well, that's another topic for another time. Let's just say, for now, that Armenian lobbyists might have thought that I was an Armenian donor. This might explain why the Armenian archives of the period, religious or lay, are closed to public access to this day. Turkish archives, on the other hand, are wide open under a single roof in their multi-purpose built modern facilities in Istanbul since mid-1980s. This brings the first question to mind. If the Armenians are so right in their long-discredited political claim of genocide, then why would they not open their archives to the world, like Turks did? What are Armenians afraid of? I suspect that if Armenians opened their archives, then the world would see the smoking guns behind all Armenian crimes, their instigators, their financiers, their manipulators, and the perpetrators, as well as their extensions in the missionary establishment among the Western diplomats, politicians, and journalists. The world would be shocked to realize how scheming, untrustworthy, cruel, and brutal the ARF people and their Western supporters really are. The book Houshamatyan is only a modest sneak preview of things to come. The title itself is a dead giveaway. Houshamatyan of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation Centennial Volume 1, Epic Battles, 1890 to 1914. Epic battles? Here it is, directly from the horse's mouth. Whatever happened to good, loyal, unarmed, non-combatant, angelic Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire? I thought the Turks killed all unarmed, non-combatant, loyal Armenians. Where did these armed combatants and disloyal Armenians come from? Apparently, there is another side to this story that goes untold. And the ARF is the one who's finally doing the telling. My goodness, don't the ARF's epic battles sound awfully like the Turkish narrative? Haven't the Turks been saying all these things for years? And haven't the Turkish grievances almost always fallen on the deaf Western ears out of spite, anti-Turkish bias, and Islamophobia? This book is dedicated to the Armenian youth with more fighting words. I quote, "This volume, prepared on the occasion of ARF Centennial, is dedicated to you, the youth, successors of the dauntless generation that waged the Armenian epic battles," unquote. This may explain why Armenian terrorists in the past 50 years have always been young, impressionable Armenians. Armenian leaders, whether Dashnaks or others, seem to have two sets of books. One set promotes poor, starving, unarmed, non-combatant, loyal, angelic Armenian myth for public consumption, which is readily available on the internet and in bookstores, and another set of books which documents Armenian hate crimes to show the Armenian youth how brave their forefathers were fighting epic battles with those bad Turks. This set of books is not for public consumption, so you cannot find them on the internet or in the bookstores. If you can understand this hypocrisy, then you can understand the Armenian psyche and their bogus genocide claims. Continuing with the book, in the preface section, the editorial staff says that this, and I quote in summary, "We, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Western Region, Central Committee, present the history of the first 25 years of ARF, epic battles. Our heartfelt wish is to produce two subsequent volumes, the Battle for Survival and the Battle for Armenianism. In this volume, the achievements of the ARF have been recorded chronologically up until the time of 8th World Congress held in July of 1914, unquote. The book is a translation from the original text in Armenian, published in Los Angeles in 1992. I waited for 15 years for the volumes 2 and 3 to come out, but without success. Either the ARF Western region would not or could not publish them, or they published them, but I failed to penetrate their secret distribution network. I shall be indebted to anyone, therefore, who can send me those mysterious volumes 2 and 3, if those books exist at all, of course." Under acknowledgements, the editor says the primary purposes of this publication are twofold. One, to make the English-speaking public world aware of this mythic struggle, ARF from 1890 to 1914. And the other one, to convey to the Armenian youth how heroic ARF has been. Struggle of the mythic proportions? What struggle? Aren't you telling the whole world that Turks systematically killed all Armenians with nationalistic motives? Where did this struggle of mythic proportions come from? To liberate Armenia? There is no mention of such struggle in the official Armenian narrative. Turks were the ones talking about the Armenian revolts, bombings, assassinations, raids, and murders, not the Armenians. So now ARF proves the Turks right. Then there is the reference to the ARF's so-called heroic undertakings. Since when taking arms against your own government, murdering defenseless Muslims in Eastern Anatolia, and burning their villages pass as heroic undertakings? What country in the world, past or current, would allow an armed insurgency of any size? If insurgents can claim a right to bomb, kill, maim, destroy, and terrorize a country, then the host country has the right and responsibility to crush that insurgency, to protect the country's sovereignty, and keep its citizens safe. Finally, the book talks about the ARF's legacy. Legacy? Do acts of terror pass as legacy? Are Armenian terror organizations like Nemesis, Asala, JSAG, ARA, and others considered good adherents to ARF's legacy? Are you aware that the FBI listed in 1984 the Armenian terror organizations as the second most dangerous in America? What legacy are we talking about here? In the table of contents, we see maps, map legends, war diagrams, photos, stories, and more, which I will cover shortly. On page Roman numeral 14, there's a picture of 3 Armenian terrorists who are exalted with the following phrases: sacred relics of the makers of the Armenian Revolution, immortal representatives of the Armenian epic battles, the valor they manifested, and enchanting pictures. This kind of intense terrorist worship cannot be healthy in a democratic society today. May I remind you that 4 Turkish diplomats were assassinated on American soil since 1973 by these terrorist worshippers. Let's talk about the ARF coat of arms for a minute. On page 3, you see a red flag held by a fist, a quill, a spade, and a dagger or a sword, representing armed violence, bloodshed, and vengeance. In other words, you have a symbol of terrorism right on the ARF logo. This is the thanks Turks get for allowing the Armenians to prosper while keeping their language, culture, and religion intact for 6 centuries under Turkish rule. ARF's dagger. Note that a prominent Dashnak historian, Hrach Dasnabedian, the author of the book History of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Dashnak Sutyun, 1890-1924, says this about ARF on page 47. I quote, Istanbul was of fundamental importance as a theater of operation for demonstrative activities and propaganda. It is in this light that we should view the terrorist activity that evolved from 1892 to 1896 when the ARF assassinated Armenians who served the Sultan, unquote. Louise Nalbandian, another Armenian historian, further spelled out exactly where the Dashnaks were coming from in her book, Armenian Revolutionary Movement. I quote, the ARF program of 1892 officially sanctioned terrorism as a method of activity, unquote. There you have it. Both Dashnak and non-Dashnak Armenian historians themselves stated clearly that ARF is a terrorist organization. Of course, the Turks did not need the Armenian historians to tell Turks that the ARF was a terrorist organization, as Turks endured the countless ARF acts of terror like raids, revolts, bombings, assassinations, robberies, abductions, and more. It is important to note that the Turkish protests fell on deaf ears in Europe, which only worsened this situation. Going back to Houshamatyan's book, we are informed on page 5 about the birth of ARF. Various Armenian student organizations were established in the Ottoman and Russian empires in 1880s, which got together in the summer of 1890 in Tiflis to create ARF. On page 7, the 3 so-called founding fathers are introduced: Zoryan, Mikhaelian, and Andon, all 3 born and educated in the Russian Empire. On pages 8 through 10, some 24 ARF founders are presented with bios, some with photos. On page 11, we learn that upon the conclusion of the founding meetings of 1890 in Tiflis, the ARF issued the following manifesto, which served as a declaration of ARF's goals. After lamenting the centuries of tyranny under Turkish rule, when they actually lived in peaceful cohabitation with Turks and other Muslims, and prospered comfortably, they lash out with these fighting words. I quote, "Armenians no longer request freedom, but instead they demand it with weapon in hand. ARF members have sworn to shed their last drop of blood," unquote. Though these words sound like poor, starving, unarmed, loyal Armenian citizens cliché to you, Dr. Gwen Dyer, a London-based independent journalist, put it succinctly in 1976, and I quote, "The deafening drumbeat of the propaganda and sheer lack of sophistication in argument, which comes from preaching decade after decade to a convinced and emotionally committed audience, are the major handicaps of Armenian historiography and the diaspora today," unquote. Well said, Wayne. I have nothing to add to it. On page 13, we see a map showing parts of sovereign countries like Turkey, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. All Armenians' neighbors as historic Armenia. This is perhaps the most problematic state of mind, which is at the core of all of conflicts between Armenia and its neighbors for 100 years. Armenians seem to consider any place where they once lived as their own, regardless of the fact that they were a minority there, and with total disregard for other groups of people who also lived there for centuries and who constituted the majority. With this logic, one shouldn't be surprised if one day Armenians claim Glendale and Fresno too as historic Armenia. Going back to Houshamatyan book, we are given on page 15, the ARF activity centers in the so-called historic Armenia. And from page 17 to 89, the book is dedicated to the ARF acts of terror and their perpetrators from 1890 to 1900 period. We will study them next. Unfortunately, we're out of time this week. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.